Okay, let's dive in. We're looking at some specific source material today, excerpts from an audio broadcast, and it paints a pretty intense picture of threats, supposedly right here in the U.S.
That's right. And the core claim, really the focus, is this idea that groups, specifically like ISIS, are actively getting ready to launch, well, what the source calls death squads or sleeper cells inside the United States.
Yeah, and just to be clear up front, our mission here isn't about saying if this is true or false. We're here to really unpack this specific source's arguments.
hmm
We want to understand exactly what it says is happening, the evidence it points to, and importantly, why it claims this is all going on.
And the central idea in this source is, well, quite specific. It argues there are these outside forces, it calls them globalists,
Yeah.
who are deliberately, intentionally helping people. The force describes as radical jihadis get into the West.
Into Europe, Canada, and the U.S. specifically.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And the source claims these individuals are being brought in so they can carry out attacks.
So let's start with that idea of an influx. The source makes a really bold claim here that these globalists are moving, quote, millions of radical jihadis, military-aged men into the West.
And a crucial part of this, according to the source, is secrecy. It insists the actual numbers involved are being deliberately kept under wraps, hidden from the public.
Right, and the source tries to connect this to methods it says were used before. It talks about private contractors, giving out vouchers, shipping people labeled illegal aliens around the U.S. Now, the source claims this same method is being used for radical military-age Muslims.
And it explicitly calls these individuals radical jihadi invaders. Strong language.
Very strong. And this whole idea then feeds into the source's argument about, well, potential government complicity.
Yeah, it's a complex claim. It suggests that, okay, maybe the general government apparatus is trying to stop attacks. But that there are these criminal groups, as the source puts it, high up within the government structure who are actually helping orchestrate it and protecting him.
Him being unclear who exactly.
The source isn't specific on the him, but the overall claim is that this is being done to usher in tyranny.
That's a really significant accusation from the source. And it specifically names figures like Obama, along with these globalists, saying they're letting the people in, letting them attack.
And the framing is important here. The source isn't saying the attacks themselves are fake, like staged events.
Right.
Instead, it argues that these high-level government elements are essentially opening the door and allowing it to take place. The source calls this a kind of false flag operation in that sense.
Okay, so from this alleged intentional influx and complicity, the source then shifts to the immediacy of the threat. It brings in a guest.
Yes, Tim Kennedy. He's described as a UFC fighter, but also someone with expertise in special forces and elite anti-terrorism units.
And the source really leans on his supposed warning. It claims Kennedy was in their studio just 2 weeks ago saying attacks are imminent.
Right, saying sleeper cells are here. And the source attributes this directly to Kennedy's own high-level observations, claiming he's actually seeing the preparations for it.
So not just speculation, but based on observation, according to the source's account of Kennedy's words.
That's the claim. And this specific warning, ISIS is preparing to activate cells inside the U.S., is repeated several times in the broadcast material we reviewed.
Okay, so what evidence does the source offer to back up this narrative of ongoing imminent attacks? It seems to point to past events, but with its own interpretation.
Exactly. It reinterprets them. For instance, it lists the San Bernardino shooting, but immediately claims it was wrongly dismissed as mere workplace violence by, mainstream accounts.
And it does the same with the Fort Hood shooting, right?
Yeah.
The one involving Major Needle Hassan. The source says that, too, was mislabeled as workplace violence.
Correct. The source's list also includes shootings at military recruiting centers, Army, Navy, Marines.
And incidents like police officers getting shot in Philadelphia, attacks on nightclubs, but in Canada this time?
Yes. And it also brings up an attempted attack, it says, in California during a gay pride parade.
And here again, the source contrasts its view with official statements, claiming that while Obama might have called it a hate crime, the source insists, no, this was an Islamic Jihad attack.
That distinction is key to the source's argument.
And the Orlando nightclub shooting is also on their list. The source presents that one as, quote, just part of phase one.
So you see the pattern. The source consistently takes these different events and rejects explanations like workplace violence or hate crime.
It labels them all, unequivocally in its view, as Islamic Jihad attacks.
And for some attacks, particularly those targeting LGBTQ plus venues or events, the source draws a direct line.
Right. It mentions that 11 Muslim countries execute gays, presenting that essentially as the explicit motive.
So building on these reinterpreted past events, the source then claims things are escalating.
How so?
It argues the attacks are happening more frequently at shorter intervals and they're becoming more intense. It calls these probing attacks.
Like testing defenses.
That seems to be the implication. And based on this perceived trend, the source actually made specific predictions about future targets.
What kind of places?
It specifically mentioned nightclubs, schools, and significantly, places they know people are disarmed.
Okay. The disarmed element seems important to their prediction.
It does. And it even justifies the nightclub prediction by comparing it to attacks on similar venues in the Middle East, like in Iraq under Saddam or in Israel.
So we've got this whole picture from the source, an intentional influx, government elements maybe helping it, warnings of imminent attacks from experts like Kennedy, past events reframed as jihad. But what's the ultimate point, according to this source? Why allow this?
Well, according to this perspective, it all serves a specific political agenda. The source claims that right after these attacks happen,
Yeah.
what it calls the Stop the Violence Bloomberg crap begins, which is clearly a dismissive reference to calls for gun control.
Okay. So the attacks are seen as a pretext.
Precisely. The source connects it directly back to the globalists. It argues they allow these attacks to happen specifically because they're going to use it to take our basic freedoms.
Primarily gun rights, it sounds like.
That seems to be the main focus, yes. The idea is that the attacks create fear, and that fear is exploited to justify taking away rights, especially Second Amendment rights, all under the banner of protecting us from the jihad.
So the terror threat is real
Yeah.
in the source's view, but it's being used.
Exactly. It's being instrumentalized for political gain, according to this source.
Yeah.
And it weaves in other related assertions to kind of bolster this worldview.
Like what?
Well, there's a pretty strong claim that the left allied with radical Islam because you hate America and freedom so much. A very direct accusation.
Wow. Okay. Anything else?
It also alleges that the U.S. government itself actually funds radicals overseas in other countries.
Creating a pipeline, essentially.
Yes, describing it as a conduit that leads through Turkey into Europe and eventually, the source claims, into the United States.
And it mentioned Donald Trump's predictions too, right?
It did. It noted that Trump had predicted more attacks in America and in Brussels, even mentioning a potential 9/11 style attack in May. The source seems to present this as a kind of validation of its own warnings.
And there was a mention of censorship as well.
A brief one, yeah, claiming that big platforms, Facebook and Google specifically, are actively censoring the spread of our info, presenting themselves as truth tellers being suppressed.
Got it. So, wrapping it all up, the source concludes with some really dramatic language.
Extremely dramatic. It frames the whole situation as a real war room, describing it as a war.
A war
Where the globalists are allied with radical Islam to help bring down civilization. That's the final stark assertion.
that is quite the comprehensive narrative. It ties together immigration, politics, specific attacks, gun control debates, everything under this one umbrella of an intentional plot by globalists using radical Islam to destroy freedom.
It certainly is a singular, very pointed interpretation. It takes many complex, often separate events and weaves them into one cohesive story with clear villains, motives, and a predicted outcome.
So just reflecting on what the source itself presents, not endorsing it, but just looking at its internal logic. It argues attacks are escalating. They're allowed to happen by powerful hidden groups.
Yes, deliberately allowed.
With the ultimate goal of stripping away freedoms, particularly gun rights, using the resulting fear as justification.
That is the core argument laid out in the source material we examined.
So thinking about that specific narrative, the one presented by this source, what does this perspective, if you were to adopt it, suggest about how you, the listener, should view things going forward? How might it encourage you to interpret, say, future news events, public incidents, or even official government statements? What underlying assumptions does this framework push you towards?